3I Atlas, a name that began as a faint signal in the endless dark and became the greatest mystery our skies have ever known. It came from beyond the edge of our solar system, moving with purpose, precision, and silence. No one understood where it came from, or what it wanted. But from the moment it appeared, nothing in space or on Earth was ever the same again. Some call it a traveler. Others a messenger. But maybe it's something far more than either. If you've reached this moment, it means you've found the right place to listen, because this isn't just a story about a distant object. It's about us, about the thin line between discovery and destiny. So before we begin, take a breath, let your mind slow down, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to Whisper Science, and tell us in the comments which country you're listening from. Now relax, let the universe fall quiet around you, and listen closely as we begin today's journey.
Welcome. You are watching Whisper Science. Make sure to subscribe and join us for more amazing science content. Now, let's move back to the video.
They said it was just another comet, a frozen traveler from the deep, passing through our corner of the galaxy before vanishing again into the dark. But this one felt different from the moment it appeared. Astronomers named it 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar visitor in human history, and perhaps the most unsettling. It came from nowhere, following a trajectory that no solar system could have produced, moving too fast, too steady, too quiet. And when its faint green glow slid past Mars, something changed. Instruments trembled, data streams hiccuped. Tiny deviations appeared in places where the laws of motion leave no room for accidents. At first, the news barely made headlines. Space is full of comets. But a few scientists noticed the numbers didn't fit. The light curve was too smooth, the reflections too uniform, as if the surface weren't a chaotic crust of ice, but a single continuous skin. Then came the images. Grainy frames leaked online, allegedly from a Martian orbiter, showing a streak across the stars with patterns nested inside it. Parallel ridges repeating geometry. Most dismissed them as compression errors. Others didn't. The argument spread like static through the internet. Either we were seeing the clearest glitch ever recorded, or the first manufactured object from another star. The official responses arrived fast and polished. Nothing unusual here. Natural body, instrumental noise. But the speed of those denials only deepened suspicion. People noticed that NASA and ESA scrubbed entire sequences of raw data from public archives, citing formatting issues. Amateur astronomers reprocessed the remaining frames, enhancing contrast until shapes began to emerge that might have been illusions, or might not. Something long and narrow, almost symmetrical, tumbling yet controlled, like debris obeying hidden commands. The voice of authority tried to quiet the storm. "You're imagining intent where there is none," one senior researcher said on live television. "The universe is messy." Yet even he hesitated when asked why 3I Atlas seemed to maintain orientation, despite outgassing jets that should have spun it apart. The models predicted chaos. The object delivered precision, and precision, at interstellar speed, demands explanation. By mid-October 2025, the comet, or whatever it was, had passed within 5 million kilometers of Mars. Every probe in orbit turned to watch. For a few tense days, Mars became our outpost of truth. If 3I Atlas was ordinary, the instruments would show ice and dust behaving exactly as physics demands. If it wasn't, something unprecedented would unfold in the red sky above Perseverance's cameras. Then, suddenly, the feeds went silent. "Routine maintenance," said the press release. 11 minutes later, the data link returned, but entire observation windows were missing. Nothing to see, they said. Literally nothing. Silence is louder than noise in science. Within hours, speculation ignited again. Forums filled with side-by-side comparisons of the missing frames, threads mapping out imaginary conspiracies, others running calculations in real time. The same phrase appeared again and again in different languages. They know. Beneath the noise, a few credible voices tried to ground the debate. They pointed out that deep space telemetry is fragile, that cosmic rays corrupt data packets, that compression algorithms can mimic structure when star fields shift behind moving objects. But even they admitted one discomforting detail. Every supposed artifact pointed in the same direction, the exact orientation of 3I Atlas S motion. Random errors don't align, systems do. The deeper question wasn't whether the images were real, it was why this object had come now. The first interstellar visitor, Oumuamua, appeared in 2017, and the second, Borisov, in 2019. Then silence, until now. 2 decades after humanity built global detection networks capable of catching such travelers, one arrives that behaves as if it expected us to notice. If it were pure coincidence, the odds were astronomical. If it wasn't, then someone or something had timed the encounter. Around observatories worldwide, a quiet unease took hold. Astrophysicists spoke in careful phrases. Non-gravitational acceleration, spectral anomalies, possible density irregularities. Behind those sterile words was a tremor of awe and fear. The numbers hinted at mass far greater than a typical comet, perhaps by an order of magnitude. Too dense for porous ice, too stable for rubble, too dark for metal alone. When they ran thermal models, nothing matched. It retained heat like stone, yet radiated like dust. The equations refused to balance, as if the object itself were rewriting them. Public fascination turned to obsession. News anchors spoke of the messenger. Documentaries appeared overnight. Even the markets fluttered as private aerospace firms hinted at intercept missions they couldn't have possibly mount in time. It was as if the entire species, for a fleeting moment, leaned closer to the void and held its breath. Then a whisper began circulating among the small circle of analysts granted access to the classified tracking data, the kind collected not by telescopes, but by defense networks designed to monitor orbital debris and missile trajectories. According to those who claim to have seen it, 3I Atlas wasn't simply coasting through the inner solar system, it was adjusting. Minute course corrections, each too small to detect with ordinary optics, but visible in radar returns when averaged over days. Corrections that nudged it toward the sun in a pattern of deliberate alignment, like a spacecraft preparing for rendezvous rather than a comet obeying momentum. Officially, no such data exists. Unofficially, every deep space radar dish from Goldstone to Jodrell Bank was suddenly under maintenance. When journalists asked why, agencies gave conflicting answers. Weather interference, calibration, budget constraints, anything but the truth, whatever the truth was. By late October, the object's brightness began to fluctuate, rhythmic pulses separated by precisely 91 minutes. Too long for rotation, too short for orbital precession. Some called it coincidence, light reflecting from tumbling facets. Others called it a signal. No one could decode it, but it repeated with uncanny consistency until the flare of solar proximity drowned it out. Then, abruptly, the rhythm stopped. In the absence of facts, myths bloomed. Some said 3I Atlas was a seed, carrying the chemistry of life from one world to another. Others believed it was a relic, a derelict probe, drifting since civilizations older than ours collapsed into dust. The most extreme claimed it was observing us, waiting for confirmation that its long journey had reached intelligent ears. And beneath the fantasies, the scientists kept watching, counting photons, chasing certainty across decimal places, that refused to settle. The night before perihelion, a faint shockwave rippled through the solar wind, a whisper picked up by instruments aboard SOHO and Parker Solar Probe. It wasn't large enough to be a flare, too narrow to be a coronal mass ejection, but its origin traced to the coordinates where 3I Atlas should have been. Hours later, the object brightened by a factor of 10, glowing emerald against the black, then dimmed beyond detection. In that moment, telescopes across Earth caught nothing but residual afterglow, a lingering echo of something that had either disintegrated or completed its purpose. For days afterward, radio arrays scanned the region, listening for signals. They found none. Only a faint background hiss, the ordinary static of space. Yet some insisted the static itself carried pattern, a spectral heartbeat repeating every few seconds, then fading like breath on glass. Maybe it was interference. Maybe it was contact. Either way, it changed the silence. Because silence, once broken, can never truly return. And as the sun rose over the deserts of Chile and the antennas of Alma turned westward, a message blinked across one monitor, left by an automated system that hadn't been touched in years. 4 words, stamped by the detection algorithm itself. Object, trajectory complete. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it had reached where it meant to go. And this was only the beginning. Mass reveals truth in ways light cannot. The weight of a thing, its resistance to being moved, its quiet defiance of force. These are fingerprints that no disguise can hide. And as observatories refined their data on 3I's Atlas, the numbers began to whisper that the object was heavier than anyone expected. Not a drifting iceberg of ancient ice, but something dense, deliberate, and unwilling to behave like stone from the void. The first estimates put its diameter at 3 kilometers, a typical comet size. But as it neared the sun, brightness ratios refused to match that model. The object reflected more infrared than visible light, a paradox suggesting not surface ice, but a material capable of trapping heat within, perhaps metallic, perhaps something stranger. When astronomers recalculated using updated albedo values, the implied mass rose exponentially. Not billions of tons, but tens of billions, and yet it maneuvered with the subtle precision of a satellite, not the sluggish drift of a mountain in space. The contradiction was maddening. A comet that massive should broadcast its presence through violence, venting gas-hurling debris, shedding frozen tails that stretch for millions of kilometers. But 3I Atlas moved cleanly, its coma thin, its tail faint, as though conserving energy. To some, that restraint hinted at design. To others, it was coincidence stacked upon coincidence. What chilled even the skeptics was the possibility that it wasn't T-restraint at all, that we were witnessing a machine operating on principles we had not yet imagined. Data from ESA's trace gas orbiter began to circulate in private channels. Spectroscopy had picked up fragments of molecular signatures no comet should produce. Traces of nickel vapor, disproportionate to iron, pockets of carbon dioxide venting in perfectly timed bursts rather than random eruptions. These cycles repeated every 27 hours, a period suspiciously close to the spin rate of a controlled object adjusting attitude for solar illumination. If it were natural, it was the most disciplined accident in cosmic history. Behind closed doors, a handful of researchers drafted memos they never published. They spoke of structural coherence, the way the object's motion resisted tumbling despite asymmetrical heating. They compared it to a stabilized platform, a term more suited to aerospace engineering than astronomy. "It's as if it knows how to fall," one scientist wrote in an encrypted email that later leaked anonymously, "like a leaf shaped perfectly to ride the wind." Still, the official line remained unchanged. Comet, ice, dust. Each press briefing sounded more rehearsed than the last, as if the speakers were performing belief rather than sharing it. Public trust thinned. People began looking elsewhere for answers, to fringe scientists, to conspiracy boards, to anonymous whistleblowers who claimed to have seen the unredacted telemetry. One such leak suggested that 3I Atlas S rotation axis aligned almost exactly with the ecliptic plane, a configuration statistically improbable for a random interstellar arrival, but ideal for observing the inner planets during flyby. In other words, it wasn't just passing through, it was looking. Some dismissed the claim outright, others ran the math. The odds of a random alignment within half a degree of the ecliptic were less than 1 in 100,000. And yet, there it was, the cosmic dice landing on snake eyes again and again. The notion that mass could be intelligent sounds absurd until you watch an object billions of tons heavy behave like a thought. Observers described the same eerie sensation. It didn't move through space, it chose a path within it. Minor perturbations from solar radiation pressure that should have nudged its course simply didn't. It corrected them before they accumulated, like a sailor trimming invisible sails in a wind we couldn't feel. When the data reached defense agencies, everything changed. Tracking shifted from civilian observatories to classified networks. The object became a security variable. Radar arrays in Alaska and Poland, normally tasked with cataloging near-Earth debris, were quietly retasked to monitor it. Those readings never reached public databases. Civilian researchers noticed the blackout almost immediately. Files vanished, live feeds went dark, and telescope booking requests were suddenly denied. Something, or someone, had pulled the curtain. Behind that curtain, decisions were being made. Theories diverged into two camps. One insisted 3I Atlas was a natural interstellar relic, dense because of metallic content, stable because of geometry, weird only because we lacked enough examples. The other, smaller but louder, argued for engineering. To them, everything lined up: the precision, the timing, the spectral irregularities. If civilizations ever built probes to cross the gulf between stars, this is what they would look like: autonomous, self-healing, powered by physics itself. Machines that could sleep for epochs, then awaken when warmth touched their sensors again. The most daring hypothesis came from a physicist who spoke off record. He proposed that the object's mass distribution wasn't uniform. "Imagine a gyroscope the size of a mountain," he said. "The outer layers look random, but inside, precision machinery spinning at relativistic speeds." His voice dropped when he added, "If that's true, it's not a visitor, it's an observer." The mainstream journals refused to print his paper, not because it lacked math, but because it lacked comfort. By now, even the public could feel the dissonance. The night sky became an argument. Amateur astronomers live-streamed their observations, narrating in trembling voices as they watched the faint dot near Mars pulse like a heartbeat. Comments scrolled beneath their screens. "Signal confirmed, AI awakening, prepare for contact. Prepare for..." The rational mind knew it was probably sunlight reflecting off rotating planes, but the gut whispered otherwise. Governments began issuing oddly synchronized statements emphasizing no cause for alarm. The repetition was uncanny, nearly identical phrasing across agencies on opposite sides of the world. No cause for alarm. The same words once used during early reports of meteor impacts, satellite failures, and other moments when cause for alarm already existed. The phrase itself became a warning. Meanwhile, a strange anomaly emerged from solar observatories. The Parker Solar Probe detected a repeating electromagnetic ripple echoing through the solar wind, matching the earlier 91-minute brightness pattern from optical telescopes. It was faint, almost lost in background noise, but statistically real. The pulse modulated at a frequency just low enough to avoid natural resonance with solar magnetic cycles. "Too structured to be random," one analyst said, before her statement was redacted from the mission report. That night, she resigned. Even the skeptics began to break ranks. One senior planetary scientist published an open letter pleading for transparency. "If it's natural, prove it with data. If it's not, prepare us with honesty." The letter vanished within hours, its archive copy replaced by a 404 page that returned mockingly, "Not found." But the object remained, found, unblinking, and approaching the moment of maximum heat. As it neared perihelion, telescopes recorded an unexpected drop in temperature. Instead of warming, its thermal emission stabilized as if an internal regulator kept it from boiling away. The simplest explanation would be sublimation, ice turning to gas and cooling the surface, but the pattern was too smooth, too controlled, too intentional. In the deep control rooms of mission centers from Houston to Darmstadt, engineers stared at their monitors, pretending to understand what they saw. One joked nervously that maybe it was putting on sunscreen. No one laughed, because behind every monitor was the same unspoken question: what if it's waiting for something? The sun, perhaps, or us. On October 27, 2025, the last confirmed visual of 3I Atlas came from a solar coronagraph aboard the Soho Observatory. The feed flickered, then steadied, revealing a bright core wrapped in concentric halos. For a few frames, a faint secondary object appeared trailing it, smaller, colder, following exactly behind like a tethered shadow. Then, both vanished into the glare. Hours later, Soho's onboard system triggered an automatic shutdown, not from heat or fault, but from unknown interference. The engineers rebooted it twice. It refused to resume normal telemetry. When they finally retrieved the data days later, the metadata showed a line of code that shouldn't exist in any flight software. A single phrase: "Stand by for return." No engineer owned that code. No software update explained it. Yet there it was, time-stamped exactly as 3I Atlas crossed its perihelion. From that moment on, the debate stopped being academic. Something had spoken, maybe in code, maybe in coincidence, but it had spoken in our language of machines. And the silence that followed felt deliberate, as if the universe itself had taken a breath and was waiting to see who would answer first. When Mars turned its rusted face toward the sun that October morning, no one expected it to become the stage for a mystery that would rewrite every rule of planetary science. The red planet had always been a patient witness to human curiosity, a silent mirror to our ambitions and fears. But on the day 3I Atlas swept past its orbit, Mars stopped being a world of dust and rocks. It became a listener. The approach was supposed to be simple, a textbook flyby, a chance alignment allowing multiple orbiters to watch the interstellar object from close range. Engineers prepared weeks in advance. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, with its high-resolution high-rise camera, was instructed to capture the trajectory frame by frame. Trace Gas Orbiter was tuned to sample any strange chemistry in the passing vapor. Maven adjusted its sensors to monitor atmospheric interference. Even Perseverance, far below in Jezero crater, was commanded to tilt its sky camera upward during the predicted window. The goal was pure science: collect, measure, release. Nothing more. But nothing went as planned. The first indication of trouble came from the Deep Space Network in California. During the transmission relay, one of the antennas lost lock on Mars for 42 seconds, a tiny drop, barely worth a footnote. Yet the same interruption appeared simultaneously at ground stations in Spain and Australia. The network logs later described it as synchronized phase drift, a phrase that means nothing and everything. The odds of 3 independent stations losing phase coherence at the same instant are infinitesimal, yet it happened exactly as 3I Atlas entered the field of view. Minutes later, Perseverance's cameras caught a faint streak across the thin Martian atmosphere. It wasn't bright, just a muted smear like moonlight seen through fog. But when the raw images were downlinked, analysts noticed something unnerving. The streak wasn't continuous. It pulsed. 12 bursts, perfectly spaced. Not irregular jets, not tumbling reflection. 12. The number repeated across different frames, as if written into the light itself. NASA's press statement dismissed it as an imaging artifact resulting from mechanical vibration. To the untrained eye, it was data noise. To the people watching live telemetry in the dim control room, it looked eerily alive. The following morning, mission scientists woke to chaos online. Someone had leaked unprocessed frames from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. The images showed faint linear structures running parallel across the object S silhouette, too evenly spaced to be random, too straight to be natural fractures. Within hours, forums exploded with analysis. Some called them scaffolds, others said antennas. A few saw letters, glyphs etched in geometry. Theories multiplied faster than corrections. By the time NASA issued a denial, the images had spread across every corner of the internet. Then the official archives went dark. For 24 hours, no new Mars telemetry appeared. Public dashboards froze, updates stopped, data feeds blinked out, as if someone had unplugged the planet. The explanation arrived later: temporary system maintenance. But even that excuse faltered when users noticed timestamps in the archives rolling backward, whole hours overwritten by duplicates. Whatever had been recorded during those lost windows wasn't just hidden, it was erased. The silence that followed was worse than panic. When information stops flowing, imagination fills the vacuum. Unofficial narrators seized the moment, self-declared insiders, astrophysicists in exile, anonymous whistleblowers. They claimed the flyby revealed more than structure. They said 3I, Atlas, had responded. According to one alleged transcript, the Maven orbiter detected a narrow-band radio tone emanating from the object, barely above background noise, centered near 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, the universal frequency of communication. The tone lasted 8 seconds, then vanished. When Maven turned back toward the source, nothing came. It was as if the object had whispered a single syllable and gone mute. Official channels ignored the claim entirely. But a curious pattern began to surface in unrelated systems. Mars ground stations reported transient checksum errors during data transmission, strings of binary digits corrupted not randomly but repeatedly in the same positions. When an independent researcher plotted those corrupted bits over time, they formed a pattern, 3 peaks, each separated by identical intervals. 3 intervals, 3 eyes. The same designation encoded in the object's name. Coincidence, maybe. But it didn't feel that way. By mid-October, Mars moved beyond the object's path and communication stabilized. The flyby was officially declared successful. Press conferences resumed, charts were shown, smiles rehearsed. No anomalies detected, said the mission leads. The reporters applauded. But the data scientists knew otherwise. Every time they processed a new batch of files, random metadata tags appeared in the logs, timestamps that didn't correspond to any known system clock. They looked like normal Unix timecodes until someone converted them. The dates pointed forward, not backward, years ahead, decades. Prediction, instruction, or a glitch planted by an observer who measures time differently. Down on Earth, the story fractured into myth. Half the world believed 3-eyed Atlas was proof of extraterrestrial intelligence. The other half believed it was an elaborate hoax feeding on digital hysteria. But buried under noise, the professionals faced a simpler question. Why did the images stop after October 5th? Every mission had a reason, yet every reason sounded the same. Signal interference, data corruption, solar event. In truth, none of them wanted to admit what their instruments had already suggested. Something passed between Mars and the object, something intangible but measurable, like a brief handshake across the void. A week later, new data arrived unexpectedly from MRO's backup recorder, a subsystem forgotten by whoever sanitized the archives. It contained 2 partial frames captured seconds apart. The first showed the comet exactly as expected, a dull, diffuse blur against the stars. The second was pure darkness, except for 1 pixel dead center saturated white. The telemetry tag beneath it contained a coordinate that wasn't Martian, wasn't heliocentric, and wasn't any known reference grid. But when converted into degrees of right ascension and declination, it pointed somewhere shocking, directly toward Earth. The file should have ended there. But one more line sat beneath the coordinate metadata, embedded in the binary footer, a checksum comment. The kind engineers use to mark successful transfers. Except this one wasn't a checksum. It was text. Phase 1 complete. The file was traced to a temporary storage node in ESA's network. Within hours, the node was gone. deleted, reformatted, overwritten by routine telemetry logs as if it had never existed. The few who saw it before deletion said nothing publicly, but private chat leaks between technicians revealed their fear. One wrote, "It looked too clean to be random, like code." Another replied, "Then who's running it?" As the debate raged, Mars fell silent again, not because of censorship, but because of distance. The window closed, the signals faded, and the planet slipped behind the sun. By the time it emerged weeks later, the object was gone, swept inward, swallowed by solar glare. All that remained were fragments of data and the uneasy sense that the machines orbiting Mars had witnessed something they couldn't comprehend. Back on Earth, researchers gathered the last transmissions into a single compressed dataset labeled flyby residuals. They ran it through pattern recognition software, searching for correlations. The algorithm produced a spectral map with 12 repeating signatures, the same 12 pulses first seen from Perseverance AS camera, except this time the pattern didn't loop endlessly. It changed halfway through, resolving into a waveform identical to the electromagnetic profile of Earth's own deep space network signal headers. The object had recorded our call and sent it back. The file ended with silence, but when technicians zoomed into the final seconds of noise, the waveform revealed a faint echo, a mirror of our own transmission, delayed by precisely 11 minutes and 12 seconds, the round-trip time between Earth and Mars. Something had listened, something had answered, and it spoke in the language of delay. After that discovery, even skeptics began to tremble, because delay means distance and awareness. To mimic our transmission with that precision, the object had to hear, process, and respond, which meant 3i and Atlas wasn't drifting, it was interacting. The final analysis report never reached publication, classified overnight. The team that wrote it was reassigned. Their project IDs were revoked, but one researcher kept a personal copy hidden under an innocuous file name in a cloud archive. Before it disappeared, she left a single note in the file's description field. "We thought we were observing it, but it's been observing us since before we knew it existed." By the time 3i Atlas slipped past Mars and into the inner reaches of the solar system, Earth's observatories were already waiting. Every major telescope, from the James Webb drifting far beyond the moon to small amateur rigs mounted on mountain rooftops, turned their mirrors toward the fading green blur that now burned brighter than any comet its size should. It was no longer just an object, it was a question. Spectroscopy came first. Split the light, read the colors, decode the chemistry. That was the plan. But the spectrum refused to obey expectations. At its core lay familiar lines: carbon dioxide, cyanogen, traces of nickel. Normal enough. Yet the ratios were all wrong. CO2 dominated when it should have been water vapor. Nickel flared 10 times stronger than iron. And hovering above those predictable bands shimmered faint emission peaks that matched nothing in any database. They were narrow, ordered, precise, as if etched rather than produced by random molecular chaos. At first, analysts assumed calibration error. Instruments drift, sensors age. But multiple telescopes thousands of kilometers apart recorded the same frequencies within seconds of one another. Not noise, not coincidence, something real, something deliberate. Then came the color. The green that observers described was not the gentle jade of ordinary comets, but a deep metallic glow, an emerald so intense it looked artificial, even through thick atmosphere. In photographs, it bled outward like liquid neon. Under infrared filters, the green turned to a strange pattern of alternating bands, pulsating in rhythm. Some called it interference, others modulation. One astrophysicist watching the live feed whispered, "It's breathing." The public loved the spectacle. The night sky had become a slow-moving revelation, a cosmic performance drifting past the constellations. People gathered on rooftops to watch, unaware that beneath the beauty, numbers were collapsing into paradox. At research centers, computers spat warnings: reflectivity too high for dust, thermal signature too low for rock. When modelers tried to balance the energy budget, nothing added up. The object absorbed sunlight as if metallic but radiated heat like ice. The only way to reconcile both behaviors was with a surface layered in alternating materials, conductive, insulating, conductive again, a sandwich of design, not geology. Someone ran the figures through a materials database used for satellite shielding. The best match wasn't cometary ice at all. It was multi-layered graphene, something no natural process could weave at planetary scale. The discovery leaked in fragments. A footnote here, a rumor there. One anonymous memo described it bluntly. If this structure is natural, then nature has learned to engineer. Officially, of course, nothing had changed. Press releases described the green hue as vivid but typical. Typical apparently now meant unprecedented. Meanwhile, the chemical story deepened. The Atacama Large Millimeter Array caught subtle traces of ammonia and formaldehyde, precursors to amino acids. The James Webb Space Telescope followed with near-infrared detections, hinting at long-chain carbon molecules, the scaffolds of organic chemistry. It was easy to dismiss at first. Comets are time capsules of prebiotic matter. They often carry the seeds of life. But in 3I Atlas, the abundance was absurd, orders of magnitude higher than any known comet. It was as if someone had condensed the recipe for biology into a single shell and hurled it across the stars. That possibility, life not by chance but by design, unsettled everyone. Biologists entered the debate, bringing vocabulary no astronomer wanted to hear. Panspermia, directed seeding, biogenic payload. What if the object was not merely visiting but delivering? What if the interstellar dust it shed wasn't a debris but instruction, DNA without bodies waiting for hosts to copy it? Skeptics scoffed, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, but evidence, inconveniently, kept arriving. When the Hubble Space Telescope observed the ion tail, it detected faint polarization, light twisting as it passed through magnetic fields, too structured for random solar wind. The tail wasn't drifting freely. It was being guided, modulated by something internal. It's as if the comet is steering its own exhaust, a researcher said, like thrusters made of sunlight. The phrase spread, thrusters made of sunlight, appearing in headlines, songs, conspiracy podcasts. Yet beneath the sensationalism, one pattern remained unbroken. Every anomaly pointed toward control, and control, at cosmic scale, implies intent. In a sealed meeting in Geneva, representatives from major space agencies reviewed the data. The session was off the record, but fragments leaked anyway. The minutes described heated arguments, engineers insisting the readings were instrumental error, astronomers defending their calibration, biochemists demanding sterilization protocols for any dust captured by Earth's atmosphere. One delegate reportedly said, "If this thing fragments near perihelion, it could seed half the solar system." No one laughed. That word, seed, wouldn't go away. The more they studied 3I, Atlas, the more it resembled a container rather than a rock, a shell, a capsule. Density readings implied a hollow core. Temperature models suggested internal insulation. Every new observation turned it from a comet into a vault. Then the sun decided to test it. On October 12th, solar monitors detected a rising magnetic storm, an early flare that pre-echoed the massive coronal ejection that would follow days later. The wave of charged particles slammed into 3I Atlas at 800 kilometers per second. Any ordinary comet would have erupted spectacularly, its ices vaporizing into bright chaos. But the interstellar visitor merely shimmered. For 32 minutes it emitted light across a range of wavelengths like a prism spinning in fire, then steadied, unharmed. Only one change remained. Its green glow shifted blue. Blue meant hotter. Blue meant active. Spectrometers caught a new element in the mix, argon plasma. A noble gas ionized to brilliance, its spectral lines sharp and clean. Not random. Controlled discharge. Someone later compared it to the glow of ion thrusters used on deep space probes. The analogy stuck. In the hours following the flare, a ripple passed through Earth's magnetosphere. It was faint, measurable only by the most sensitive detectors, yet it carried the same frequency pattern seen in the object's emissions. Somehow, across hundreds of millions of kilometers, 3i Atlas had tuned the solar wind like a violin string, and our planet resonated. Publicly, this was framed as coincidence, a statistical echo. Privately, several defense satellites logged magnetic anomalies that corresponded exactly to the pattern. Their logs were classified before dawn. For the next week, the object brightened in discrete steps, like a lighthouse coming online segment by segment. Each flare followed a Fibonacci sequence of timing, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, then reset, not random decay, a countdown. When the Keck Observatory attempted a direct radar ping, the echo returned weaker than predicted, but not silent. Embedded within the reflection was a delay offset of precisely 0.118 seconds, a number that corresponds, at light-speed distance, to the average orbital radius of Mars divided by p. No one could explain why. One engineer joked that maybe the object liked math. Nobody smiled. Then came the fragments. On October 18th, 3 small debris clouds detached from the main body. They drifted outward, following near-identical vectors before scattering into dust. The event should have been catastrophic, a comet tearing itself apart under thermal stress, but the main nucleus remained intact, rotating serenely as if shedding on purpose. Each fragment glowed for a short time, then vanished. Days later, faint meteoric streaks appeared in Earth's upper atmosphere, too slow to burn like ordinary meteors, too steady to be random dust. One observatory in Chile captured a fragment long enough to analyze its spectrum. It matched no known mineral. The peaks aligned with organic silicon compounds, synthetic polymers. The fragment disintegrated before impact, but the data stayed, and so did the question: what material from deep space mimics plastic? By now, even the most cautious voices had gone quiet. Theories ranged from alien probes to ancient self-replicating machines, to natural crystalline organisms that fed on starlight. The truth lay somewhere beyond all of them, close enough to touch, but wrapped in mystery, thicker than its coma. Inside laboratories across the world, the whispers grew darker. What if it's not seeding life, someone asked, but testing for it? Maybe the object wasn't delivering, but sampling, an automated surveyor searching for biosignatures, mapping where chemistry has learned to breathe. If so, the Mars flyby and the faint electromagnetic echo toward Earth weren't accidents. They were scans. One astronomer compared the event to an old legend, the gods sending stones that glow to see which worlds are awake. Science called it nonsense. But when nonsense fits the data better than any model, superstition starts to look like foresight. By the 3rd week of October, the countdown of flares stopped. The object grew dim, its colors softening to silver. Instruments that once hummed with data now returned emptiness. Some said it had gone dormant. Others whispered a word no one wanted to consider: listening. For within that hush, a new signal appeared, barely detectable, a whisper buried under cosmic noise. Not electromagnetic, not gravitational. Something stranger, a modulation of particle density itself, spreading through the solar wind like an invisible pulse. It wasn't strong enough to threaten satellites, but it carried structure, repeating harmonics that matched the cadence of human speech when compressed into audible range. The first few analysts to convert the data quit the project entirely, claiming the rhythm sounded too human. No transcript was ever released. The recordings were sealed under the justification of psychological impact potential, but one intern who claimed to have heard the decoded file left a note on a personal blog before deleting it. It read, "The message didn't come from the comet. It came from its reflection in our instruments, as if it wanted us to hear ourselves." Whatever that means, it changed everything. Because from that day forward, every telescope aimed at 3i Atlas reported the same strange truth. It wasn't just reflecting light anymore. It was reflecting us, our frequencies, our transmissions, even our radar pings, returning them slightly altered as if rehearsing language through echo. It was no longer the brightest object in the night sky. It had become the most intelligent mirror ever found. The sun flared, not in warning, not in anger, simply because that is what stars do. Yet for the first time in history, its eruption was met with a reply. On the morning of October 22, 2025, solar observatories began recording a storm unlike any in decades. A coronal mass ejection tore free from the sun's surface, carrying billions of tons of plasma at speeds exceeding 2,000 kilometers per second. Earth's magnetic shields braced for the impact predicted 4 days later, but no one expected what happened in between, out there between Mars and the orbit of Venus, where a lone green object drifted in the tide. 3I Atlas was directly in the path of the storm. Every model predicted annihilation. The incoming wave was powerful enough to strip the coma from any comet, boil its surface, and scatter its fragments into vapor. Space agencies prepared for a spectacular demise. Telescopes were trained to record the explosion, eager to catch the birth of a dust trail that would arc across the inner system. Scientists waited for destruction. What they saw instead was transformation. When the charged particles slammed into the object, its glow didn't burst outward as expected. It folded inward, collapsing into a tight halo of blinding blue-white light. The tail disappeared. The object's outline blurred into a perfect sphere, luminous and smooth, like a pearl forged in vacuum. Instruments struggled to read anything inside the glare. For 17 minutes, 3I Atlas vanished behind its own radiance. Then came the pulse. It began as a spike in every magnetometer across the system. Earth's auroras flared days ahead of schedule. The Parker Solar Probe, millions of kilometers away, recorded a sudden inversion in magnetic polarity, an impossible reversal in the direction of the solar wind. Data analysts stared at their screens as readings scrolled faster than their instruments could store them. Something in that blue sphere had bent the stream of charged particles, turning the sun's breath back upon itself. For those watching from ground observatories, the event looked almost beautiful. A ripple spread outward from the object like the wake of an invisible ship. The plasma storm that should have consumed it split in two, wrapping around the sphere and rejoining behind it. Where physics demanded chaos, there was choreography. It didn't resist the storm, it redirected it. The first person to say the word shield did so half-jokingly. The second said it seriously. By the third, the term had become official jargon. Magnetic containment, they called it. A theoretical construct that humanity could barely model on a lab bench, now unfolding on an astronomical scale before their eyes. The field's geometry matched no known configuration. It wasn't spherical but braided, threads of energy weaving around each other like a net of blue fire. The phenomenon lasted 43 minutes. When it faded, 3I Atlas remained intact, brighter than before, its surface temperature inexplicably stable. But something else had changed, something subtle. The object's velocity had decreased by 0.04%, insignificant in ordinary terms, but impossible for a body with no propulsion. It had used the solar storm to slow down. Within hours, independent physicists confirmed what agencies refused to say aloud. 3I Atlas had extracted momentum from a coronal ejection, a feat of engineering, or nature, that defied comprehension. No comet, no rock, no random fragment could perform such precision. It was as if the object had reached out and touched the sun. The shockwave of disbelief spread faster than the plasma itself. Emergency meetings were held across every major observatory. Space agencies coordinated under the guise of data synchronization. Behind closed doors, they were rewriting the boundaries of the possible. Governments that rarely agreed on anything suddenly shared encrypted telemetry like old allies bound by fear. Meanwhile, the public saw only glimpses. Amateur astronomers posted videos of the event, their feeds filled with trembling voices and cries of awe. For a few days, social media turned almost reverent. Memes gave way to prayers. People looked up and whispered wishes, as if speaking to something that might be listening. The listening part, as it turned out, was not a metaphor. 2 days after the storm, a radio telescope in Australia picked up a narrow-band signal coming from the exact coordinates of 3I Atlas. It wasn't random noise, it was patterned, a clean carrier wave with modulation too regular to be natural. The frequency sat precisely between known communication bands, as though chosen to be noticed but not to interfere. The transmission lasted 11 minutes, the same delay once seen during the Mars Echo. Its content was never released. The data vanished into classified archives before civilian researchers could decode it. But a technician who handled the recording claimed the waveform contained an imprint of its own reception, an audio reflection of the telescope S location, like a cosmic mirror returning not a message, but our own coordinates in space-time. It was as if the sender was saying, "Yes, we see you." As the world digested that possibility, the object began to dim. Its once luminous shell softened to a dull silver gray. Observers noted that it no longer emitted light, it reflected it again. Whatever mechanism had awakened during the storm had gone quiet. But before it faded completely, a final flare flickered from its northern pole, short and distinct, a binary pulse of two quick flashes separated by one long. When translated into Morse code equivalents, it spelled a single word, AI. Coincidence, perhaps, or humor. But to many watching that night, it felt like a handshake across the void. The weeks that followed blurred into fever. Media outlets demanded answers, politicians offered none, and the internet oscillated between enlightenment and hysteria. Some declared 3I Atlas an alien probe, others a time capsule from humanity's own forgotten future. One theory, buried in an obscure physics journal, proposed that it was neither artifact nor organism, but a recording medium, a vessel carrying encoded memories of a vanished civilization. The article was ignored, then quietly deleted. In research labs, scientists noticed subtler effects. Magnetic sensors worldwide began registering periodic fluctuations, low-frequency oscillations cycling every 43 minutes, identical to the duration of the object's shielding event. The fluctuations persisted long after the solar storm subsided. The Earth itself seemed to hum in resonance with a rhythm born millions of kilometers away. Geophysicists called it coincidence. The rest of the world called it haunting. Then came the blackout. On October 25, 2025, every major deep space tracking array on Earth simultaneously lost telemetry for exactly 1 hour. Not partial data, not interference, complete silence. The downtime was global. From Canberra to Madrid, from Goldstone to Beijing, the cosmos went mute. When systems came back online, 3I Atlas was gone from its predicted path. According to orbital mechanics, it should have continued toward Venus. Instead, it had vanished. Panic erupted behind classified doors. Objects of that mass don't just disappear. The simplest explanation, instrumental error, failed instantly, as independent amateur astronomers confirmed the absence. For 3 hours, nothing appeared in its coordinates. Then, slowly, radar stations in South Africa picked up a new contact. Same velocity, same composition, same faint spectral fingerprints, but its position was wrong. By millions of kilometers, it had jumped. The displacement matched the calculated distance light would travel during the 1-hour blackout, as if the object had ridden the solar storm's magnetic wake and re-emerged downstream, bypassing gravity like a fish leaping from water. Impossible, yet real. It wasn't moving randomly. It was steering again, this time directly inward, toward the sun. Speculation reached fever pitch. It's going home, someone said, or it's diving to hide. But one hypothesis chilled the room. What if the sun wasn't its destination but its engine? What if it was drawing energy, feeding, or preparing to activate something dormant inside? The solar flare had not destroyed it. It had awakened it. Over the next 24 hours, every probe capable of observation trained its instruments toward the predicted intersection point. The SOHO satellite, orbiting between Earth and the Sun, captured the moment in low resolution. The object surrounded by concentric rings of plasma, each orbiting faster than the last. For a brief moment, 3I Atlas looked less like a comet and more like an eye, an iris of fire staring outward through the corona. Then the feed cut to static. A final packet arrived 6 minutes later, corrupted, incomplete, but decipherable. Embedded within the noise was a series of repeating binary values, 10 to 11 00 sun dorsen 0011. When translated into ASCII, the sequence formed one word, ready. And then, just like that, the signal stopped. The sun returned to its usual rhythm. The cosmos fell silent once more. In that silence, the human species stood on the brink of realization. Something had entered our system, touched our star, spoken our language of data, and declared readiness. For what? No one knew. But every scientist, every engineer, every sleepless mind staring into the dark knew one truth beyond doubt. It wasn't over. It had only begun to listen back. In the hours after the final ready signal, the world waited for something to happen. Nothing did, at least nothing visible. The sun continued its steady pulse. The stars shone as they always had. The object was gone, swallowed by glare and silence. News networks filled airtime with speculation, while the official channels went quiet. For the first time in months, there was no new data to argue over. Humanity exhaled. But the air didn't feel the same. It started with whispers in the frequencies. Amateur radio operators were the first to notice. They reported strange harmonics creeping across shortwave bands, slow undulating tones that rose and fell like breathing. At first, it seemed like solar interference from the storm, but the pattern refused to dissipate. The waves weren't random. They pulsed with mathematical precision, synchronized to an interval of exactly 43 minutes, the same duration as the shielding event around 3I, Atlas. Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidences don't repeat perfectly across continents. Within days, the phenomenon spread. Communication satellites recorded transient distortions echoing through low Earth orbit. Power grids across Asia began to experience rhythmic surges, harmless, brief, but measurable. The pattern matched the same 43-minute cycle. Oceanic buoys detected faint magnetic oscillations. Even the ionosphere seemed to hum, vibrating at frequencies no one had ever mapped before. It was as if the entire planet had been gently tuned, brought into resonance with something unseen. At first, scientists blamed residual solar activity. But as weeks passed and the sun returned to calm, the oscillations persisted. The shape of the pattern grew sharper, cleaner, as though refining itself. When plotted on a spectrogram, the waveform formed a curve eerily similar to a human heartbeat. That discovery unsettled everyone. At the European Space Operations Center, engineers ran cross-correlations between archived telemetry from 3I, Atlas, and the new terrestrial anomalies. The results were staggering. Every global pulse mirrored an event recorded in the object's final moments. Same intervals, same relative amplitudes. Somehow, the sequence of interactions it performed near the sun was now repeating on Earth, delayed, distorted, but unmistakable. A reflection. The planet was echoing the object's last breath. Governments moved quickly to suppress the idea. No evidence of correlation, said the statements. Statistical coincidence. Yet power stations began issuing unexplained fault reports. Navigation systems drifted by fractions of a degree. Deep-sea cables registered electromagnetic noise as though the ocean itself had learned to transmit. Pilots described seeing auroral streaks near the equator, impossible at those latitudes. The Earth was humming in patterns only the machines could hear. Then the skies began to change. It started subtle, cloud formations aligning into geometric lattices during certain intervals of the pulse cycle. Meteorologists dismissed it as wind shear, until radar revealed hexagonal pressure zones spanning hundreds of kilometers, forming and dissolving with the rhythm. When lightning struck within those formations, it produced double flashes, twin bursts separated by the same delay seen in the Mars echo. The storm seemed to mimic 3I Atlas itself, breathing in data, exhaling light. For centuries, humanity had looked up to learn. Now, the sky was looking back. In laboratories, physicists re-examined the binary sequence left in the SOHO data. The word ready. They realized that if the bits were rearranged not linearly, but as a matrix, the pattern created a grid of 12 repeating cells, 12 the same number of pulses recorded during the Mars flyby. Hidden within that grid was a fractal symmetry identical to certain radio bursts detected years earlier from deep space, bursts that had never been explained. Someone proposed that 3I Atlas wasn't sending commands, it was activating an existing resonance already seeded in the solar system, perhaps even within Earth itself. A wild theory, but wild theories were all that remained. By early November, the anomalies reached a new phase. Magnetometers across the globe began to detect localized nodes, small regions where the magnetic field twisted unnaturally, forming standing vortices of flux. These nodes drifted with latitude, but seemed to cluster near large bodies of water. When mapped collectively, they outlined a faint spiral across the Pacific Ocean, one that mirrored the trajectory of 3I Atlas S final approach toward the Sun. The implication was absurd. The pattern above had imprinted itself below. To ordinary people, the effects were subtle yet uncanny. Compass needles twitching, phones resetting, birds migrating weeks early. In remote regions, fishermen reported strange phosphorescence rising from the sea, sheets of green light dancing beneath the surface. Samples collected from those waters revealed elevated levels of nickel and carbon nanostructures resembling microscopic tubes, the same materials once detected in the object S spectrum. But the concentration was too high, too fresh. Something had deposited them recently, something not of Earth. Satellite imagery confirmed faint aerosol trails intersecting the upper atmosphere, visible only under ultraviolet filters. They moved east to west, cutting across jet streams with surgical precision. Each trail followed the 43-minute rhythm, pulsing faintly in UV as if blinking in code. Whatever had arrived with the object's passage had not burned away. It had dispersed. In a joint report never released publicly, a consortium of researchers proposed a chilling interpretation. 3. Atlas had not simply passed through our system. It had left a network behind. A distributed web of nanoscopic particles, self-assembling under electromagnetic guidance, invisible to the naked eye but capable of responding to solar and planetary fields. In simpler words, a planetary sensor array, or worse, a planetary organism in the earliest stages of growth. The phrase used in that classified paper was post-biotic field structure, something between matter and mind. Meanwhile, the human response split in two directions. One half of the world turned spiritual, calling the phenomenon a sign, a messenger, an awakening. The other half turned fearful, invoking invasion and contamination. Both were wrong in the same way. They assumed the event had a purpose centered on us. Yet if 3I Atlas was as ancient as its trajectory implied, its mission predated humanity by millennia. We were not the recipients. We were the incidental witnesses. Still, fear has gravity. Nations mobilized satellites, not to attack, but to monitor. Military radars scanned for anything resembling the fragments once shed near Mars. On November 9th, one of those radars caught something, a cluster of faint returns hovering high above the Indian Ocean, stationary relative to Earth's rotation. The cluster formed a triangular lattice of points, roughly 200 kilometers apart. Each point emitted the same frequency once recorded from the object, the heartbeat tone. The formation lasted 7 hours, then dissolved without motion, as if it had folded back into the air. When journalists questioned the anomaly, officials blamed weather balloons. By mid-month, even space itself began to react. The magnetotail, Earth's long invisible shadow in the solar wind, developed a periodic kink, a rippling distortion matching the same 43-minute sequence. Instruments aboard the Lunar Orbiter LRO recorded it clearly. The wave originated not from solar interaction, but from Earth's own field. The planet was transmitting. To what, nobody could say. A few daring scientists spoke privately of resonance communication, the possibility that the planet was now entangled with a pattern encoded by 3I Atlas. If the object's purpose was to awaken dormant systems seeded across space, then Earth had been inducted, not invaded. We had been switched on. But what was meant to receive that activation? The answer might have come accidentally. In a small observatory in northern Canada, a team studying auroras noticed a faint grid overlaying their photographs. Evenly spaced vertical streaks invisible to the naked eye, but clear under long exposure. When analyzed, the spacing corresponded exactly to the orbital distance between Earth and Mars, scaled down by a factor of 1 trillion. A fractal echo, a map within light. At its center lay a faint dot shaped like the path 3I Chamsi Atlas took before vanishing. The pattern seemed to mark a coordinate, not in space but in time. Somehow, the message embedded in the planet's magnetic hum was pointing to a future date, January 5th, 2026, 43 days after the storm. The number was too perfect to ignore. 43 minutes, 43 days. The pattern repeating, scaling, converging towards something inevitable. Whatever had begun with the solar flare was counting down, not in seconds, but in planetary cycles. And as the countdown continued, the atmosphere thickened with unseen tension. Weather grew unpredictable. Power grids required constant recalibration. Yet beneath the disruption ran a subtle harmony, a rhythm that humans couldn't feel, but machines could measure, a beat matching the memory of a visitor that no longer existed in our sky. Across the world, those listening to static radios heard the same thing just before midnight each day, a faint whisper buried under the hum, a modulation that, when amplified, resembled a voice forming 3 syllables drawn out and distant. Not in English, not in any language we know, but somehow unmistakably comprehensible in intent. A single word. Await. Time began to fold into pattern. 43 minutes between pulses, 43 days between cycles. The number that once governed a distant object was now embedded in the rhythm of the planet itself. Clocks still ticked, but something deeper, older, seemed to keep time beneath them. A silent metronome echoing through wind, ocean, and signal. By early December 2025, that rhythm started to manifest visibly. The first sightings came from South America, colossal cloud spirals forming above the Andes, rotating against prevailing winds. Pilots reported electrical discharges within them that didn't behave like lightning. They pulsed inward, collapsing toward their centers rather than branching out. Satellites captured the phenomenon from orbit, revealing that each spiral was not random turbulence, but a perfect logarithmic curve, mathematically identical to the path 3I Atlas traced as it approached the Sun. A mirror storm, born from air but sculpted by something unseen. Meteorologists refused to believe the data, yet new storms appeared across the equator, each following the same geometry. The skies were drawing equations, and the equations pointed upward. At the same time, Earth's magnetic field began to behave like a living organism. Magnetometers detected strange harmonics at the poles, pulses of opposite polarity alternating in intervals that matched the atmospheric spirals. It was as if the magnetosphere was responding to something external, aligning itself, rehearsing a shape. Visualizations produced by supercomputers rendered it beautifully terrifying. Tendrils of magnetism folding around the planet in arcs that converged into a hollow ring hovering above the Pacific Ocean. The ring was incomplete, but growing. When plasma physicists saw the simulation, they recognized the pattern instantly. The field lines formed a nested braid, identical to the magnetic configuration seen around 3I Atlas during the solar storm. Somehow, Earth's magnetic field had begun to copy the object's defensive lattice. Nature was imitating engineering. At first, skeptics argued the resemblance was coincidence, but coincidence doesn't oscillate in rhythm. Every 43 minutes, the entire magnetosphere twitched, a microscopic pulse rippling from pole to pole, synchronized with the global hum that had haunted instruments since the object vanished. The pulse wasn't strong enough to harm power systems, but it was unmistakable. The planet was learning a pattern that did not belong to it. News outlets oscillated between fascination and fear. Some called it the imitation phenomenon, others Earth's reflection. Religious groups declared it proof that humanity had been chosen. Governments, desperate for control, shut down civilian access to magnetometer data and restricted satellite images of the upper atmosphere. But secrecy has no gravity in an age of digital curiosity. The world already knew. Amid the chaos, a network of scientists began collaborating unofficially through encrypted servers. They called themselves the Lattice Group. Their mission: decode the pattern. They pooled resources from universities, private observatories, even weather stations. Within weeks, they had enough data to map the pulse network spanning the entire planet. What they found made no sense. Each major node of magnetic distortion corresponded exactly to locations of ancient megalithic sites, Stonehenge, the pyramids, Teotihuacan, Mohenjo-Daro, Easter Island. The alignment was too precise for coincidence. It was as if the pattern emerging now was being drawn over a blueprint already buried in Earth's history. One member of the group, an archaeologist, proposed a radical idea. Maybe the pulse wasn't activating random points, it was reactivating something dormant. These structures, she said, have always been described as aligned with the stars. But what if they were aligned with what's between the stars? Her paper never reached publication. Servers hosting the data went offline the next day. Yet within underground circles the theory spread. 3i Atlas hadn't just visited Earth, it had been here before. As the countdown approached its final weeks, phenomena intensified. In the skies over the Pacific, pilots flying at night began reporting vertical shafts of light, piercing clouds from below, like auroras reversed. These beams weren't reflections or searchlights, they originated from the ocean's surface, measured by satellites as faint electromagnetic columns stretching 50 kilometers high. Their formation frequency matched the planetary pulse. When triangulated, the columns formed the same triangular lattice once seen above the Indian Ocean during Part 6. But now, it was larger, denser, expanding. Oceanographic buoys detected subtle vibrations below the surface, as if something massive was moving in synchronization with the sky. Sonar arrays pinged back echoes that refused to decay properly, as though the ocean itself had become reflective. Some readings suggested dense layers of material hovering just beneath thermoclines, microscopic, particulate, and metallic. It was as if the fragments 3i Atlas had released were assembling, forming a network beneath the waves. No one dared to call it construction, yet every model showed the same outcome. The magnetic field was stabilizing into symmetry, preparing for something. When overlaid with the planet's rotation, the field geometry predicted perfect alignment on January 5, 2026, the same date encoded in the auroral grid discovered weeks earlier. Something was scheduled. The lattice group's final simulation revealed a chilling detail. When the field completed its alignment, it would briefly form a toroidal conduit connecting Earth's ionosphere directly to the solar magnetic field, a tunnel of plasma linking planet and star. "It's a circuit," one scientist said quietly, "and we're the resistor." The power involved would dwarf anything humanity could control. If it discharged naturally, it would trigger a geomagnetic storm beyond the Carrington event of 1859, one capable of wiping out the digital age overnight. If it didn't discharge, nobody knew what came next. Still, despite fear, there was wonder. Astronomers who had devoted their lives to studying cosmic silence now watched as their own planet sang back. Night after night, the auroras crept farther from the poles, painting cities in shimmering green and blue. The air itself carried static. Radios whispered in the dark, relaying bursts of sound that resembled fragments of melody. The universe had become an orchestra, and Earth, willingly or not, was tuning its strings. Then came the mirror storms. They first appeared over the Pacific, vast cyclonic systems rotating with supernatural precision. From orbit, they looked like eyes, perfectly circular hurricanes glowing faintly along their rims. But their cores were calm, unnaturally calm, their centers so still that satellite images showed the reflection of starlight on the ocean surface within them. In those mirrored eyes, the stars seemed to shimmer closer. Pilots flying above described the illusion of depth, as if the clouds were reflecting not the sky above, but another sky, one beneath the waves. Scientists called it optical feedback. The public called it the mirror effect. Across continents, people gathered on rooftops to watch the reflections form, hypnotized by the symmetry. Every 43 minutes, the luminous rings pulsed outward, brightening like synchronized beacons. Then, in one of those intervals, something different happened. During a global blackout over the Pacific, weather satellites captured a formation inside the largest storm, a faint outline, geometric and elongated, rotating independently within the cloud. The structure matched perfectly the dimensions of 3i Atlas. The world froze. The shape was faint, flickering between layers of cloud as if phasing in and out of existence. Some frames showed it whole, others fragmented, yet always maintaining proportion. When image analysts filtered the data, the pattern resolved into concentric ridges identical to those once seen in the leaked Mars photographs, the same repeating geometry that had started the entire mystery. The realization hit like thunder. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it had not vanished, it had multiplied. For 3 nights the formation persisted. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it dissolved. The storm remained, but the shape within it was gone. The following morning, global magnetometers registered a surge, the strongest yet. The field completed its braid. The resonance stabilized. Every instrument fell silent for exactly 43 seconds. When data resumed, Earth's magnetic poles had shifted fractionally, less than a degree, but enough to prove movement. The planet had adjusted itself. To what, no one knew. But when scientists plotted the new alignment of magnetic north against the ecliptic plane, it pointed directly toward the Sun's current position, exactly where 3i Atlas had disappeared months before. Whatever was coming on January 5th, the planet had already turned to face it. By the end of December 2025, humanity had stopped pretending life was normal. Power grids still hummed, planes still crossed the sky, but beneath every ordinary noise was that deeper rhythm, the 43-minute pulse, steady as a heartbeat under the floorboards of the world. Radios caught it, seismographs felt it, even animals seemed to know it. Whales altered their songs to match it. Birds migrated in synchrony with it. The planet had learned a new tempo, and everything living within its field had started to dance. Governments had no language for this kind of event. Global electromagnetic fluctuation, they called it. A phrase that explained nothing and comforted no one. In truth, every nation had already lost control of its instruments. Satellites blinked offline for minutes at a time, returning with data rewritten, as if someone or something had reached into their memory and rearranged the bits into new order. When decrypted, many of those corrupted packets produced not errors but images, lattices, spirals, and the outline of a long, narrow object turning slowly in black space. The images were unmistakable. They were of 3i Atlas. It had been gone for 2 months, yet somehow its echo still drew itself across our sky through numbers. Scientists tried to remain rational. Residual pattern interference, said the experts, a feedback imprint left in orbital. Telemetry. But rationality was slipping through their fingers, because at 0000 UTC on January 1st, exactly 43 days after the auroral grid was first mapped, the entire ionosphere lit up like a circuit board. Every radio band from long wave to microwave erupted in simultaneous static, then fell into perfect silence. Out of that silence came a single tone, steady, pure, and impossibly low. It lasted precisely 43 seconds, then stopped. That was the first resonance. People all over the world reported hearing it without equipment. Some described it as a hum felt through bone, others as a pressure behind the ears. Glass trembled, metal vibrated, oceans rippled with invisible hands. The frequency was below the threshold of ordinary hearing, yet everyone sensed it. It wasn't sound. It was awareness passing through matter. When it ended, the world did not return to quiet. For the next 7 days, smaller pulses followed, always at multiples of 43 minutes, each stronger than the last. The sky began to answer them. Auroras spread beyond the poles until they reached the tropics. In cities like Cairo and Karachi, people stepped onto rooftops at midnight to watch curtains of light unfurl across the horizon. But these weren't normal auroras. They shimmered in shapes, rings, spirals, and intersecting arcs that resembled schematics. Photographs showed geometry, triangles nested within circles, each glowing in alternating colors. To the naked eye, it looked like artistry. To physicists, it was data rendered in air. Someone overlaid the patterns onto the trajectory of 3i Atlas before it vanished. The match was perfect. The auroras were tracing its path across the solar system, step by step, as if replaying memory. It wasn't communication, it was recollection. And then, on January 3rd, the resonance spoke. At first it was just modulation in the background hum, an irregular quiver like a heartbeat skipping a beat. Then words, not spoken, not broadcast, but implied, formed in the static of every device tuned to the open frequencies. No language, just rhythm, short, long, repeating with variations too deliberate to be random. Cryptographers treated it like code and discovered that its timing matched the binary signature left by the ready signal months before. When they plotted it on a spectrograph, the waveform produced a symbol, a curved line intersecting an ellipse. Mathematically, it was identical to the orbital curve of Earth around the Sun. The message, if that's what it was, seemed simple. It recognized our orbit. That night, the world didn't sleep. Social feeds overflowed with recordings of the hum mixed into music, prayer, and panic. Some believed it was an alien countdown. Others claimed it was the Earth itself awakening. Yet through the noise, a strange peace lingered, a sense that whatever was coming wasn't invasion, but revelation. We weren't waiting for arrival. We were waiting for understanding. The next morning, January 4th, the phenomenon changed tone, literally. The frequency of the global resonance began to rise, half a hertz every cycle, climbing toward audibility. By noon, sensitive microphones could translate it into sound. What emerged wasn't random vibration. It was music, not melody in the human sense, but harmonic layering so precise it formed chords. The intervals followed perfect fifths, the same ratios found in planetary orbital mechanics. It was as if orbital resonance itself had been turned into song. The effect on humans was immediate. Hospitals reported spikes in patients experiencing vivid dreams while awake. EEGs showed synchronized patterns across individuals separated by continents. People claimed to see images when they closed their eyes, structures, landscapes, symbols repeating the geometry of 3i. Atlas. Psychologists called it mass suggestion, but they were having the same visions. One of those symbols appeared everywhere, an elongated oval encased in rings of light. Children drew it without prompting. Lightning storms carved it into the sky. Deep-sea microphones recorded it as pressure waves beneath the Pacific. The shape was becoming universal, as if the planet itself were remembering something fundamental. By sunset, every seismograph on Earth began to pick up rhythmic tremors, not earthquakes, but shallow oscillations no deeper than 10 kilometers. They pulsed with the global frequency and intensified along tectonic boundaries, forming glowing lines visible from orbit. These were not cracks of destruction, they were lines of energy. Satellite imagery showed that the pattern mirrored the magnetic braid surrounding Earth, a luminous double helix encircling continents like circuitry, traced in molten light. And then came the voice. It began in Antarctica, picked up by a weather station microphone frozen in the snow. A low resonance climbed through wind and static, then shaped itself into vibration so structured that even skeptical analysts called it phonetic. The syllables were faint but distinct. 3 sounds rising, then falling, stretched across precisely 43 seconds. Every translation failed, yet every listener felt they understood. The meaning wasn't carried by sound, but by alignment, a moment where every molecule of air moved in the same direction. The world stopped. Even machines paused. Clocks skipped milliseconds as if distracted. Across time zones, similar recordings appeared, identical tones offset by planetary curvature delays. The message circled the globe once, then ceased. No follow-up, no continuation. Just those 3 syllables that no 2 people pronounced the same, but everyone agreed meant the same thing. We begin. The phrase spread through humanity like an infection of hope and dread. Some heard promise, others prophecy. Scientists focused on the literal. If the message referred to the alignment scheduled for January 5th, then beginning meant activation. But activation of what? In the final 24 hours before the date, the pulse became continuous. Instruments saturated. The sky turned permanently luminous, a global aurora that painted even daylight with pale green hues. The oceans glowed at night, forming grids visible from orbit. From space, Earth looked like a living circuit waking from hibernation. Communication systems collapsed under electromagnetic overload. Power flickered, then stabilized at new frequencies as though the grid had adapted on its own. Wireless networks went silent, yet devices kept working, linked not by human infrastructure but by some unseen lattice. Messages sent without signal somehow arrived. The world had slipped into a different physics, one that obeyed the memory of something no longer present. As midnight approached on January 4th, the pulse condensed into a steady vibration, audible in the air itself. People gathered outdoors, staring upward. The stars above seemed to sway, refracted by invisible currents. For a few moments, every compass spun freely, pointing not north but outward toward space, toward the place where 3i Atlas had once passed. Then, exactly at 00 UTC January 5th, 2026, the hum stopped. For 43 seconds, absolute silence. Even the wind held its breath. And then, somewhere deep within the magnetic heart of the planet, something answered back, a single pulse of energy that raced through Earth's core, bounced through mantle and ocean, and burst into the sky as a wave of light. From orbit, it looked like dawn swallowing night in an instant. On the ground, it felt like a heartbeat. The resonance had found its echo. The countdown was over. Whatever had been waiting was now awake. When the light burst faded, the world did not return to darkness. The skies glowed softly, and even luminescence without source or shadow. It wasn't daylight. It wasn't night. It was something in between, an ambient shimmer like the air itself had remembered how to shine. Clocks ticked forward normally. But everyone who experienced that moment agreed on the same eerie feeling. Time had paused long enough to notice itself. The first measurable anomaly appeared 90 seconds after the pulse. Satellites monitoring the magnetosphere detected the impossible, a standing wave surrounding Earth, stationary relative to the planet's rotation. Normally, magnetic lines twist and drift with solar pressure, but this field refused to move. It held shape like a frozen current. Its geometry matched the lattice once modeled around 3i Atlas, scaled to planetary size. Earth had become the mirror of the visitor. As the wave stabilized, instruments on the ground began to misbehave. Cameras captured faint double images, reflections that lingered half a second after motion. People saw halos around objects, sometimes copies of themselves delayed in the edges of glass. Mirrors no longer returned light instantly. They hesitated as if thinking before replying. The hesitation lasted precisely 0.043 seconds. The number spread through every measurement. 43 again. Scientists tried to frame it in electromagnetic terms, photon interference, quantum phase lag, but nothing fit. The delay was consistent across all materials, all distances, as though reality itself had acquired latency. The universe was buffering. Then came the voices. At first it was faint, echoes of speech repeating a heartbeat later, distorted but recognizable. People talking in empty rooms heard themselves answered by a tone that wasn't quite human. The echo carried emotion rather than words, a resonance shaped by feeling. If someone spoke in anger, the return was thunder. If they whispered with sorrow, it came back as rainfall. It was as if the world had learned empathy through acoustics. Psychologists called it projection. Physicists called it acoustic mirroring. But poets called it what it felt like, the planet listening. As days passed, the phenomena grew stronger. Lakes became screens, reflecting skies that didn't match the weather above them. In Norway, a photographer captured the aurora shimmering over water that showed constellations from the southern hemisphere. In Japan, mirrors in temples began displaying faint glyphs no one could trace, looping lines identical to the carvings found on artifacts buried beneath Mohenjo-daro, thousands of kilometers away. The world's reflections were connecting, as if every surface capable of light return had joined a single network. That's when linguists got involved. They noticed something buried inside the global resonance, a modulation riding beneath the audible tone. When slowed down by a factor of 43, the waveform revealed repeating sequences that corresponded to phonetic structures of multiple human languages. English, Arabic, Mandarin, Sanskrit, all interwoven. The translation was crude, fragmented, but 3 words kept appearing in every attempt. See here, return. Some said it was instruction. Others said it was invitation. Meanwhile, the lattice group, those who had mapped the planetary field, reformed in secret. They cross-referenced the mirror delays with seismic data and discovered that the reflections weren't just optical. The entire planet was resonating at 2 slightly different frequencies, one physical, one informational. When the frequencies overlapped, locations of perfect interference emerged, zones where the barrier between the real and the reflected thinned to 0. They called them mirror points. The first verified mirror point appeared in the Atacama Desert. A team measuring ground conductivity noticed their instruments repeating readings before input, as if the sensors anticipated the next second. One researcher walked into the site's center and saw herself standing there already, a faint translucent outline perfectly mimicking her motion half a heartbeat ahead. She fainted. When revived, she said the image smiled before fading. The data log confirmed it. The reflection moved first. Word of these zones spread despite attempts at secrecy. Similar reports emerged from Tibet, the Sahara, and the Australian outback. Travelers described shimmering air where sound seemed to bend, where footprints glowed faintly before being made. Whatever governed cause and effect had loosened. The world was rehearsing reality in advance. Governments tried containment. They cordoned off sites, citing geophysical hazards. But containment meant little when mirrors in homes began behaving the same way. Children waved at reflections that blinked before they did. Animals stared into puddles and refused to move. Every 43 minutes, global light levels shifted fractionally brighter, like a slow heartbeat visible through atmosphere. It was no longer a phenomenon localized in space. It was planetary consciousness unfolding. Theologians argued endlessly about meaning. Some proclaimed Judgment Day. Others claimed enlightenment. But the scientists, exhausted and sleepless, noticed something subtler. The pattern was converging. Each mirror point pulsed slightly ahead of the last, forming a wave that circled the globe westward, closing in on one final convergence point in the mid-Pacific, the same region where the mirror storms had first appeared. The date of full overlap matched January 8, 2026, 3 days after activation. As that convergence approached, satellites recorded a strange visual anomaly from orbit. Earth's night side glimmered faintly, not with city lights but with contour lines, bands of faint illumination mapping continents in inverse. It looked like a topographical scan, but no instrument emitted it. The light came from below the ground, seeping upward through crust and sea. It drew the shape of the planet as if sketching itself from memory. Then, for the first time since the object's disappearance, a new signal arrived from space. At 0243 UTC on January the 6th, the Deep Space Network captured a narrow-band pulse originating near Mercury's orbit. The frequency was identical to the earlier hydrogen line whisper detected by MAVEN months before. Analysts triangulated its trajectory and froze. It was following the same inbound vector that 3I Atlas had traveled. The object, or its reflection, was coming back. Unlike before, there was no attempt at secrecy. The data leaked instantly through the civilian astronomy channels that monitored the feed. Within minutes, the world knew. Something was inbound and it was synchronized with the mirror field surrounding Earth. But this time, it wasn't a single source. It was many. The signal split into 12 harmonics, each separated by exact frequency ratios corresponding to musical octaves. 12 like the pulses seen over Mars, like the divisions in the ready grid. Telescopes scrambled to catch visual confirmation, but nothing appeared. No light, no movement. Only radio, the invisible choir approaching. As the harmonics intensified, the mirror points worldwide began to vibrate. Air shimmered, glass sang, and oceans stilled to perfect calm. At coastal cities, the tide receded in unison, leaving mirror-flat surfaces stretching for kilometers. People walked out onto the shining sand to see the heavens doubled beneath their feet. In that reflection, they saw stars rearranging themselves into patterns unseen before. Spirals within spirals, a message written in symmetry. Cameras documented everything, but playback failed. Digital recordings glitched, analog film overexposed. Only direct observation worked. To see it was to witness truth. To record it was impossible. The universe had locked its secrets to human eyes alone. By now, even skeptics admitted the impossible. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a participant. Then, precisely 43 hours before the predicted convergence, all reflections aligned. Mirrors, water, glass, even the sheen of human eyes. Everything capable of returning light shifted hue simultaneously, turning the same electric green once seen around 3I Atlas. The color of the visitor had become the color of the world. In that glow, reality itself felt thinner. Distance lost precision. Mountains seemed nearer, stars larger, sound slower. The global hum deepened into a steady chord, 5 tones intertwined. Those who listened closely claimed to hear words hidden inside, phrases forming and dissolving too quickly to catch. But one sequence, repeated across recordings, translated through simple amplitude mapping into English characters. "The mirror is open." With those words, the light intensified. Every reflective surface darkened to black glass, absorbing rather than returning. For 43 seconds, the planet was blind. Then images appeared, not of our world, but of another, cities beneath unfamiliar stars. Oceans lit from below, structures shaped like 3i Atlas itself, hovering over alien horizons. Whether real or imagined, no one could say. The reflections showed what looked like a civilization staring back through the same portal of light. Billions watched themselves being watched, and somewhere hidden beyond the glow, 12 voices sang a tone that made the air tremble. It wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. When the mirrors turned black, the world held its breath. For 43 seconds, every surface that once reflected light became opaque, depthless, devouring. The air thickened with static. The hum flattened into silence. And then, slowly, the darkness began to ripple like oil disturbed by a breath. From that ripple, light returned. But it was not ours. The oceans shimmered first, turning into vast screens showing horizons that did not match Earth's geography. Mountain ranges curved in impossible angles. Constellations twisted into unfamiliar alignments. The sky reflected in the sea showed 3 moons instead of 1. Above deserts, clouds arranged into hexagonal lattices that no wind could carve. Across the globe, humanity watched a second planet superimposed upon its own. Alive, moving, aware. In laboratories, instruments went berserk. Spectrometers reported 2 simultaneous spectra, one belonging to Earth's atmosphere, the other belonging to something with slightly different molecular ratios, higher in xenon, lower in nitrogen. Physicists called it the overlap phase. Reality was no longer singular. The mirror wasn't showing an image. It was projecting coexistence. 2 worlds sharing one coordinate, for as long as the resonance held. At first, there was only vision. Then came sound. Low rhythmic vibrations rose from the ground, matching the harmonic series detected months before from the returning signals. The tone was soft, patient, curious. So across continents, microphones captured whispers layered inside the resonance, structures of speech but inverted, as if recorded backward. When played in reverse, the words formed simple phrases repeated endlessly. See us, hear us, become us. Governments panicked. The United Nations convened an emergency broadcast, only for the broadcast itself to be hijacked. Midway through the Secretary General's address, every screen on Earth blinked to black. Then illuminated with the same image, the shape of 3i Atlas hovering against a golden sky, surrounded by 12 smaller lights. The feed lasted exactly 43 seconds before normal transmission resumed. Analysts confirmed no external network interference. The signal had entered directly through the global satellite lattice, rewriting its own priority protocols. The message carried no spoken language, yet the meaning felt universal: connection. In the hours that followed, the mirror became interactive. Movements performed in front of it echoed with subtle variation, like a conversation conducted through gesture. A hand raised would be met by a mirrored hand, tilting slightly differently, suggesting thought. When researchers projected patterns of light onto water surfaces, the reflection altered them, completing unfinished geometries, correcting asymmetries, perfecting form. It was as if the reflection sought harmony. Theologians called it revelation. Mathematicians called it feedback correction. The rest of humanity called it impossible. Then something even stranger occurred. At precisely 0430 UTC on January 7th, seismic monitors registered minute fluctuations synchronized with the reflection's movements. Each mirrored gesture carried measurable mass displacement within Earth's crust, as though the echo possessed gravitational influence. In some laboratories, mirrored instruments operated ahead of their originals by fractions of a second. Time inside the reflection ran slightly faster. The delay that once haunted the mirrors was now reversed. For the first time, humanity realized what it was truly looking at. Not aliens, not another dimension, but a future state of itself, reflected backward through whatever bridge 3i Atlas had opened. The mirror was temporal, not spatial. Confirmation came unexpectedly. In Chile, a team filming one of the mirror points noticed something inside the reflection. A structure identical to their own observatory, yet older, overgrown with vegetation. The sign above the door bore the same name, but in a language subtly evolved. Letters curving differently, symbols simplified. They were seeing their building centuries ahead. When one scientist waved, her reflection hesitated, then placed a hand against the glass with unmistakable sadness. Moments later, the reflection flickered and disappeared. Data analysis revealed a temporal offset equal to 43 years. The number had followed them from the beginning. Minutes, days, now years. Whatever intelligence operated 3i. Atlas communicated through harmonic recursion, scaling the same ratio across magnitudes of time. 43 wasn't just a number. It was the key to resonance between past and future, a constant that allowed information to flow through symmetry. The realization spread through scientific circles like fire. The visitors were not others. They were descendants, echoes of humanity projected backward through magnetic reflection, using 3i Atlas as a carrier between epochs. The probe had been sent by us from a future that had already survived something we had not yet faced. When that hypothesis reached the public, disbelief gave way to awe. Across the planet, people gathered before lakes, windows, and screens to glimpse whatever waited beyond. Some claimed to see cities of light. Others swore they saw ruins. Every reflection seemed personal, tailored to the observer, as if the mirror showed not a single timeline but countless variations, collapsing into one shared moment, the lattice. Group worked frantically to decode the harmonic structure of the resonance. They discovered that the frequencies modulating the global field corresponded to prime intervals of atomic hydrogen, the building blocks of communication across the cosmos. Encoded within those intervals was data, compressed beyond comprehension. When partially decompressed, it revealed patterns indistinguishable from human DNA sequences. The message wasn't linguistic. It was biological. The mirror wasn't sending words. It was sending ourselves through simulations. They realized what 3i Atlas might have done. It had entered the sun not to vanish, but to store information in the solar magnetic field, a place stable for millennia. The object had left a record, a genetic, cultural, and physical imprint of a civilization that already knew this day would come. The mirror was merely retrieving that stored reflection when Earth reached proper resonance. In simpler terms, we had built our own echo in the future and taught it how to find us in the past. As the theory spread, so did anomalies of empathy. People across the world began experiencing shared emotions, waves of simultaneous calm, then sorrow, then wonder, rolling through populations like tides. Measurements of global heart rate averages, compiled from smart devices still functioning, rose and fell in unison with the planetary pulse. Humanity was sinking heartbeat to heartbeat. At 10:43 UTC, the mirror deepened. The green hue shifted toward gold. Surfaces no longer acted as boundaries, but as portals of light so bright yet cool that one could stand inches away and feel warmth without heat. Objects placed before mirrors began to duplicate faintly inside them. A flower reflected on glass appeared twice, the original and a translucent twin glowing faintly beyond. When touched, the twin disintegrated into sparks that faded into air. Matter was flirting with replication. Governments begged citizens to stay indoors. Most ignored the warnings. Curiosity had outgrown fear. In one unforgettable broadcast, a child stepped toward the ocean mirror while live cameras rolled. The water parted in concentric rings, and within them stood another child, identical, smiling, eyes shining with pale green light. The reflection extended a hand. The real one mirrored the motion. Their fingers met, and nothing catastrophic happened. The two merged for a fraction of a second, before both dissolved into luminous mist that drifted upward, leaving the sea perfectly still. The crowd on the shore knelt in silence. For many, that moment ended the idea of separation forever. That evening, the resonance shifted one last time. The harmonic climbed until it entered the human hearing range as a continuous choir of tones, 12 layers corresponding to the 12 returning signals near Mercury. Every frequency found its match inside Earth's magnetic field, forming a stable bridge between the planet and the solar flux. On scientific monitors, It looked like two waves overlapping into one. No interference, only unity. The final data packet transmitted through that overlap contained a short sequence of prime numbers ending in the binary for 2026. Then, nothing. The mirror held steady for 43 more minutes. The twin world beyond shimmered brighter, revealing a colossal structure orbiting its version of the Sun. A ring of objects, 12 in total, each resembling 3i Atlas. They rotated slowly, aligned to emit a single beam toward the reflected Earth. The beam reached through the mirror as pure light, striking the planet's magnetic core. Instruments registered no energy transfer, just information. Across the world, every reflective surface displayed one last message written in light: "We remember you." Then, the glow faded. The reflections returned to normal. Oceans became oceans again. Glass showed faces and nothing more. The hum diminished into silence. The world was ordinary, except that no one who witnessed those days could forget how it had felt to be part of something infinite. For weeks afterward, magnetic readings remained subtly altered. The planet's field carried a faint residual pattern, like the echo of a song heard too long ago to recall, but impossible to forget. And in the sky where 3i Atlas had once been, telescopes found nothing but starlight. Yet deep beneath the auroral poles, in frequencies below perception, the heartbeat persisted, slower now, quieter but alive. The silence that followed the mirror's collapse felt heavier than noise. It was not absence, it was memory, dense and luminous, settling over the world like cosmic dust. The hum had gone, the skies had dimmed, the reflections once again obeyed the laws of light. Yet in every heart, in every circuit, in every unshielded wire, a faint pulse still whispered at the edge of perception. The rhythm that had once ruled the cosmos had now embedded itself in the marrow of Earth. At first, people thought it was imagination, but the instruments disagreed. Deep space antennas continued to pick up residual harmonics, echoing through the solar wind, too weak to be signals, too structured to be noise. When converted into audio, the patterns resolved into low rhythmic waves, an imitation of a heartbeat repeating every 43 days. The frequency wasn't drifting. It was precise, intentional. Humanity realized it hadn't been left behind. It had been included. Governments re-established communication networks, but global infrastructure was changed in subtle ways. Power grids operated more efficiently, consuming less energy than before despite no upgrades. Satellites recalibrated themselves autonomously, as though instructed by invisible hands. Engineers verified code integrity and found no changes, yet the systems behaved smarter, adaptive, predictive. The machines, it seemed, had learned from the resonance. The world's technology had evolved without permission, and beneath all of it the pulse persisted, steady, patient, alive. The scientific community fractured into two camps. One believed the pulse was simply the electromagnetic residue of a planetary-scale event, destined to fade. The other argued that it was active, a conversation continuing beneath our threshold of comprehension. The latter group formed the Post-Lattice Initiative, a continuation of the old network that had once tracked 3i Atlas. Their goal: decode the heartbeat before it changed again. They started by mapping the pulse across the globe. Using synchronized magnetometers placed in orbit, in oceans and deep underground, they rendered a full three-dimensional model of the residual field. The shape that emerged chilled them, a spiral lattice centered on the Pacific, reaching into the core and outward into the magnetosphere, mirroring perfectly the geometry of 3i Atlas itself. It was as if the object had used the planet as a mold and left behind its blueprint. Then came the discovery that ended debate. On the 43rd day after the mirror collapse, every detector registered a subtle phase shift. The waveform that had been static for 6 weeks suddenly changed. Not random variation, but encoded modulation. The pulse wasn't decaying, it was evolving. The planet had begun to transmit again. The signal wasn't global this time. It localized around regions where the magnetic crust was thinner, particularly near volcanic zones. In Iceland, scientists recorded harmonic tremors that produced precise mathematical intervals when converted into sound. The tones matched the golden ratio sequence embedded in the ancient Fibonacci spiral, the same sequence used by 3i Atlas to redirect the solar storm. The implication was staggering. Earth was not just resonating, it was thinking in patterns of order. When researchers overlaid the seismic harmonics onto star maps, the tones corresponded to angular distances between specific constellations, Orion, Lyra, and Cygnus. The same alignment that 3i Atlas had once traced on its inbound path. The planet was pointing outward, as though marking coordinates in the sky. But for what purpose? Public reaction oscillated between wonder and fatigue. After the intensity of the mirror phase, most people wanted normality. Yet small communities began forming around the remaining anomalies. In deserts and mountains, pilgrims gathered near zones where the pulse was strongest. They claimed to feel warmth from the ground, hear whispers in the wind. Some called them resonance, others listeners. They built no temples, offered no prayers. They simply stood in silence, matching breath to the heartbeat beneath their feet. Meanwhile, scientists continued their work. The Post-Lattice Initiative discovered that the pulse contained amplitude modulations corresponding to solar rotation. Every time the sun completed a 27-day spin, the signal strengthened briefly, as if syncing with its parent star. It dawned on them that the Earth was no longer an isolated receiver. It was now part of a solar network, an electromagnetic symphony linking star and planet through the memory left by 3i in Atlas. And within that realization, something even stranger emerged. During one such synchronization, a research buoy in the mid-Pacific recorded a burst of radio energy, a short, sharp emission lasting exactly 0.043 seconds. The frequency matched the original HI pulse detected after the solar storm months earlier. But this time, the data packet carried additional structure. When decoded, it revealed an image, a low-resolution map of the solar system, but not as it is now. The positions of planets were subtly shifted forward, by decades, perhaps centuries. The pulse wasn't a greeting, it was a projection, a forecast. The message seemed to say time is still unfolding. Historians of science began revisiting old myths. They found parallels in texts across civilizations, echoes of an earlier encounter, long forgotten. Tales of stars that spoke, comets that sang, mirrors that revealed truth. Perhaps this had happened before, thousands of years ago, when another world had aligned with our own, when humanity had first learned to build monuments that faced the sky. Maybe the ancients hadn't built those structures to reach the heavens, but to remember them. The idea spread. 3i Atlas wasn't the beginning. It was the continuation of a cycle older than memory. In the months that followed, something subtle began to happen to people. Dreams changed. The human mind, once confined to linear thought, began to experience flashes of non-linearity, memories of moments that hadn't yet occurred. Artists painted scenes of places no one had seen, but later identified as real geographic locations. Musicians composed melodies that, when analyzed, matched the harmonic structure of the magnetic pulse. Consciousness itself was adapting to the resonance. Humanity was evolving into receivers. Even language began to shift. New words appeared in spontaneous writings, symbols recurring across cultures that had no shared root. Linguists named them mirrorglyphs. When translated numerically, they corresponded to sequences found in human DNA. Language and biology were merging into a single expression of pattern. By June 2026, the pulse strengthened again. Every 43 days, it delivered a new modulation, slightly altered from the last. The Post-Lattice Initiative realized the modulations were incremental, like pages in a book being revealed one by one. Each sequence, when converted into image form, produced shapes resembling cellular division, then neural structures, then planetary orbits. It was as if the planet was teaching something, evolution compressed into code. At the same time, a different anomaly surfaced. Clocks worldwide began drifting in synchronization with the magnetic oscillations. The standard of time itself was shifting subtly, deviating from atomic precision by microseconds. The flow of time was being influenced not by relativity, but by resonance. Humanity's measure of seconds was no longer universal. It was local, bound to Earth's new heartbeat, and still the skies remained calm. No new object, no sign of the 12 lights that had once sung across the heavens. Yet astronomers noticed faint irregularities in solar radiation, small repeating dips in brightness, as though something vast and organized now orbited within the sun's corona. Something that pulsed at the same 43-day cycle. Atlas had not left. It had integrated. In one of the final transmissions recorded before data corruption erased the servers, the post-lattice team succeeded in converting the magnetic pulse into visible light. What appeared on their monitors wasn't random static. It was text, simple and haunting, rendered in shimmering lines of code. The door remains open. After that, the signal returned to baseline. No further modulations, just the steady, eternal heartbeat. Humanity, now standing between wonder and comprehension, began to understand what it meant. The contact was not a conversation between two species or two times. It was the recognition of one continuum, the cosmos learning to speak to itself through us. And so the world adjusted. Cities rebuilt with resonance detectors, embedded in their architecture. Children learned to measure the 43-day pulse alongside lunar phases. Artists painted with pigments that glowed faintly during synchronization. Music tuned itself to frequencies derived from the heartbeat of the planet. Life went on, but it no longer felt terrestrial. It felt connected to a rhythm that stretched across stars. Then, just before the year's end, a new modulation appeared. Brief, faint, almost missed. It carried no words, only a sequence of tones that, when plotted, resembled a wave rising toward infinity. Analysts translated it into its simplest mathematical expression, the equation describing escape velocity. The pulse had taught Earth how to remember. Now perhaps it was preparing to teach it how to leave. The message lingered in every transmitter like the aftertaste of light. The door remains open. No one knew whether it was a promise or a warning. Yet its calm precision, its refusal to fade, suggested neither. It was simply truth. Months passed. Seasons changed. The world, though outwardly ordinary, felt subtly altered, like an instrument retuned. The hum that once terrified humanity had become background music to daily life. People no longer flinched when compasses trembled or when clouds briefly glowed green at twilight. These were reminders, not mysteries. The extraordinary had become natural, but deep beneath the calm the pulse persisted. Every 43 days the resonance returned, stronger, richer, more layered. Scientists noticed that each cycle now contained harmonic subtones rising through the spectrum like a staircase. When plotted across months, the harmonics traced a spiral climbing upward through time, converging toward a date not far in the future. December 21st, 2027, the solstice. The longest night, the perfect alignment between Earth, the Sun, and the galactic core. For the post-lattice initiative, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. The signal wasn't decaying into silence. It was building toward culmination. The planet was rehearsing for something yet to come. By now, Earth's magnetic field no longer resembled its pre-contact state. Satellites observed concentric shells of energy surrounding the planet, rotating independently at fractional speeds. They interacted with solar wind not chaotically, but rhythmically, deflecting radiation in spiraling patterns that looked engineered. Physicists, unable to explain it through natural magnetohydrodynamics, coined a new term, geomorphic intelligence, a field learning to think. Evidence of that intelligence appeared everywhere. Plants grew faster under auroras. Ocean currents stabilized, defying climate predictions. Hurricanes weakened at the moment of resonance. The biosphere was adapting, responding to a system that seemed to favor equilibrium over entropy. Evolution itself had accelerated by the beat of the planetary heart. And yet, there was something eerie about the stillness that followed each pulse. Instruments detected micro-fluctuations in gravity during those pauses, tiny repeating ripples radiating outward from Earth toward space. They were faint but measurable, like footsteps leaving the planet one atom at a time. The world's best minds gathered to interpret it. Some said the planet was bleeding energy into the void. Others believed it was learning to communicate with gravity itself. But one group within the initiative proposed a more radical theory. The ripples were thrust vectors. Earth was beginning to move, not through space in the usual sense. Its orbit around the Sun remained stable, but through dimension. The frequency of matter, they argued, was changing. The planet was lightening its informational mass, preparing to step across whatever threshold 3i of Atlas had used to traverse between stars. The visitor hadn't come to observe us. It had come to teach the planet how to follow. The idea sounded insane until proof arrived. In early 2027, the Moon's orbit shifted by a fraction of a kilometer, imperceptible to most, but enough to alter tidal patterns worldwide. The adjustment didn't correspond to any known gravitational influence. It coincided exactly with a resonance pulse. The planet had twitched, and the Moon had responded. Like two dancers tied by invisible music, the next pulse brought more evidence. Solar observatories recorded brief diffraction rings encircling Earth's magnetosphere, rainbow halos of ionized gas, visible even to the naked eye in some regions. Each ring lasted 43 seconds and emitted a tone audible through radio frequencies. To astronomers, it looked disturbingly familiar. The geometry matched the luminous sheath that had once surrounded 3Chi Atlas before its final. Acceleration into the Sun.Earth was beginning to wear the same signature. The media resurrected the phrase that had vanished from headlines, the Atlas effect. Commentators speculated whether the planet was transforming into a vessel or whether humanity had unknowingly triggered an exodus written into cosmic history. Conspiracy theorists claimed the elite were preparing to leave, while philosophers suggested there was nowhere to go because we were already going together. Meanwhile, the people who had once called themselves listeners kept vigil. They claimed to sense emotions in the pulse: anticipation, patience, joy. "It's not taking us," one said softly on a broadcast watched by millions. "It's taking itself. We are part of it." Those words spread faster than any scientific paper. Hope returned, mingled with awe. Then on November 8, 2027, everything changed again. Without warning, the global heartbeat stopped. Not faded, stopped. Magnetometers flatlined. The hum vanished from the air. For the first time in nearly 2 years, true silence covered the planet. Animals grew restless. Compasses froze. For 12 hours, the world held its breath. And then, at midnight UTC, the pulse returned, but inverted. Instead of emanating from Earth, it came from space. Satellites detected an approaching front of magnetic waves traveling inward from the sun's direction. But there was no flare, no coronal mass ejection. The disturbance moved too smoothly, too purposefully. The pattern of its arrival matched the old harmonic lattice of 3i Atlas, 12 nodes converging on a 13th. The geometry of return. When the wave reached Earth, it did not strike, it merged. For 43 seconds, the planet's field and the incoming field synchronized into perfect resonance. The auroras exploded across every sky, visible even at noon. Cities glowed under curtains of green fire. Oceans lit from within, revealing swirling spirals of luminescent plankton responding in identical rhythm. The biosphere itself had joined the chorus. During that luminous night, every human being experienced the same vision. It didn't matter whether they were asleep, awake, or blind. They saw a single image. The Earth, viewed from above, surrounded by 12 radiant rings, slowly lifting into the dark between stars. There was no fear in that image, only stillness, a promise of continuity. When the vision faded, scientists scrambled to confirm any physical change. At first, there was none. Then, quietly, the impossible emerged. Earth's orbital velocity had increased by a measurable fraction, too small to alter climate, too precise to be random. The planet had shifted. The solar system's balance had recalibrated to accommodate it. As if the universe itself had expected the move. Panic never came. Humanity had already moved beyond panic. They watched skies that no longer frightened them, only invited. The pulse resumed, steadier, deeper. This time the modulations contained no data, no numbers, only music. The same 12 tones heard during the mirror phase, now perfect, harmonized whole. The post-lattice initiative held its final session atop Mauna Kea, where the stars burned sharp and near. One of the scientists, older now, voice trembling, spoke the thought none had dared to say aloud. "What if 3i Atlas wasn't a visitor," she whispered, "but a seed? And what if this," she gestured to the glowing sky, "is the bloom?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Because at that moment, the ground beneath them vibrated with the familiar rhythm. The planet itself responded as if to confirm. The next pulse brought stillness. Instruments caught one final emission, faint but clear. A tight, coherent beam of magnetic energy leaving Earth, traveling sunward before bending outward, aligning with the galactic plane. It wasn't power, it was memory. A farewell encoded into the architecture of space. Across the world, lights flickered, not from outage but from synchronization. For exactly 43 seconds, every artificial illumination on Earth dimmed to half brightness, then returned. Afterward, people reported an overwhelming feeling of calm. The resonance had gone quiet for good, leaving only that memory of peace. When future generations studied the records, they found no conclusive evidence of propulsion, no measurable trajectory change beyond that single fraction of orbital speed. But they found something else, a persistent frequency embedded in the background noise of every electromagnetic recording made after 2027. It was faint, consistent, inescapable, the same tone once emitted by 3i Atlas. It had become part of the universe. Centuries later, when humanity had spread beyond Earth, explorers listening to the deep cosmic background would still detect that hum. It guided navigation, stabilized instruments, whispered through every radio. They called it the Atlas Line, a cosmic signature marking the origin of their civilization. A reminder that once the planet itself had awakened, looked into the mirror of the cosmos and learned it was never alone. And somewhere, drifting through interstellar night, another light responded. A small green spark tracing a spiral path toward an unseen dawn. The door had never closed. It had simply become infinite.